Hi everyone. Today we are talking about the role of Parliament and the Crown in lawmaking. This is Unit 4 AOS 1. It's going to be a significant video today. The reason behind that is a lot of students coming into Year 12 don't actually have a strong understanding of Parliament, so we need to go over some key vocabulary in order to do it. So bear with me. Hopefully by the end of this video you're going to have a pretty strong understanding. So here we go. First dot point is the role of the Crown, and when we're talking about the Crown, we're referring to the Queen, and the role of the Houses of Parliament, including Victoria and Commonwealth in lawmaking. Okay, so for us to kind of understand Australia, we need to know that we actually divide Australia lawmaking into three levels. So we've got the federal government or the Commonwealth level, we've got the state level, and we've got the local level. And the reason we divide it up is to ensure that different governments have responsibility and expertise in different areas of law. It's also part of the Constitution. They've decided to do it this way. So at the federal level, we have the Commonwealth Government, who was just voted in recently. And they look after things such as immigration, defence. This is not an extensive list, but they basically are there to represent all of Australia. At the state level, the state government represents just the state. So Dan Andrews represents Victoria, and Dan Andrews' Labor Party is the government that looks after laws for Victoria. Areas that they might look at include health, education, crime, and that's why when you go to different states, you'll see that everyone's got a slightly different health system, everyone's got a slightly different criminal system, everyone's got a slightly different education system. And then at local level, we have our local governments such as Darebin in Northcote, and they're responsible for a local area and local issues such as local parks, local roads, sidewalks, things like that. So they look after basically local problems. So three areas. We're going to focus on the federal government to start with, and we divide our federal government or our federal parliament, I should say, not government, our federal parliament into two houses. So we divide it into two physical buildings, and they each serve a slightly different function. When we refer to Parliament, what we're referring to is three things. The Queen, who is represented at the Commonwealth level by the Governor-General, the Senate, which is the upper house, who usually is responsible for reviewing any bills through Parliament, and then the House of Representative, or the lower house, which usually includes the government of the day. When we refer to government, it actually means the party with the majority of physical seats in the House of Representative. When we refer to Parliament, we're talking about the Queen, the Senate, and the House of Reps. Okay? And they're physical buildings and places and people. So, divided up into two houses. The first house that we need to talk about is the House of Representative. Now, the House of Representative aims to reflect views from all over the community, all over Australia. And it's the house that determines the government of the day. So there's 151 members of the House of Representatives, and they are elected in every 3 years, and the government is formed with the majority of those seats. So 76 seats you need to form a government in Australia. Okay, so how do we determine these seats? Well, we divide Australia up into electorates. Now, an electorate is a geographically defined area, and you can see they're all slightly different, and it's represented by a single member of Parliament, a single person, and it's usually around 100,000 people voting for this person. And then this person will have a physical seat in Parliament if they win against who they're running against. Okay, so that's how we determine who sits in the House of Representatives. So what is the responsibility of the House of Representatives? Well, there is a number of different roles that they play when they're making a law. The biggest one is the fact that they are usually the ones who initiate or make laws. Usually, the government of the day will propose a law that they want to put through. They will write up what they think the law or what a good law will look like. Then that will be sent to the House of Representatives, where it will be debated by both the government of the day, the opposition, and any type of crossbenchers, so independents who might have been elected in. And they will decide whether or not this law is a good law and whether or not they want to continue to pass that and send it down to the Senate for further discussion. The second role of the House of Representatives is actually to determine who's going to be the government. So, as I said before, the people or the political party with the most seats will form a government, and within that government, we'll have certain ministers who are experts in different fields. So, for example, defense. So, these experts will lead policies in those areas, and they will lead the country. So, the Prime Minister is from the party with the most seats, and he'll lead the country, and he'll go off to international events and propose and make laws. The third role of the House of Representatives is to represent the people. So, as I said, every electorate is divided up into 100,000 people, and it's the job of the person who has been voted in to advocate for that area, advocate for issues that people care about in that area. So, we've seen recently with Kooyong in Victoria, that area, we saw a lot of people wanting to advocate for climate change. So, that person won on that platform and will try and represent those people on that issue. The third or the fourth role of Parliament here is the ability to scrutinise the government administration. Okay, so we have the party with the majority of the seats, but their ideas and what they do need to be scrutinised and debated. So there's an opportunity during the House of Representatives to have what is known as question time, where the opposition will put questions to the government of the day, asking them about how well they're going in terms of running the country. So they're actually there to scrutinise and question what the government's up to and to ensure accountability. The last role of Parliament, or the last role of the House of Representatives, is actually to control government expenditure. So the government of the day needs to put through a bill related to spending, and this needs to be approved by the House of Representatives in order for the government to be able to tax people, allocate funds for certain policies, allocate funds to states, for example. So it's a way of ensuring that the government's actually thinking about their monetary policies and actually getting approval for those policies. Okay, the second House of Parliament is a little bit different. It's known as the Senate, and the Senate actually represents state interests rather than individual people's interests. The reason behind that, if you're interested, is basically before Australia became a federation, grouped together, it was made up of single states who did their own thing. And when they decided to have federation and create a federal government, states, especially smaller states such as Tasmania, were worried that they weren't going to have enough say in the policies of the day. So that's why we have the Senate, to represent state interests. Senators are elected every 6 years, and there's 76 of them in total. And if we can see here, let's see if I can write it down for you, because I'm having a little bit of problems with my pen today. We usually have 12 senators from the states. Okay, and then 2 from every territory. Okay, so 2 from every territory. So the Senate plays a slightly different role in determining laws of the day. The main role of Senate is to debate the laws that have come through the House of Representatives and actually scrutinise them in a lot of detail. And they do this through what is known as the committee system, where they'll actually send people from the Senate together to form small groups to actually discuss, research, and get community feedback on some of these bills before they come back and go back into the Senate and propose their findings and actually make any adjustments to the bill. So the Senate really acts as a check on the House of Representatives by reviewing any any kind of legislation that has already been approved or ticked in the House of Representatives and scrutinising it in more detail. The second role of the Senate is to act as the state's house. And what we mean by that is essentially, again, as I was saying, represent state interests such as like Tasmania and what's happening in Tasmania. The third role I said before was to scrutinise bills through the committee process, so to form inquiries into specific bills and form a deeper understanding of the proposed laws. And then lastly, the Senate can actually initiate bills themselves before they reach the House of Representatives and actually send them back the opposite way. The only time they can't do that is around budgetary things. But if a senator really is interested in a particular area and wants to propose a bill, they can actually debate it first and then send it back through the House of Representatives. So it's not linear. Bills can either start in the House of Representatives and go to the Senate, which is what usually happens, or they can go to the Senate and then come back through the House of Representatives. Okay, so what is the role of the Crown in lawmaking? Well, the Crown is essentially the Queen's representative in Australia, and at a federal level or Commonwealth level, we have the Governor General, and at the state level, we have just what is known as the Governor. But they essentially do the same things, just don't get them mixed up in terms of the wording. So, what does the Governor General do? Well, the Governor General is responsible for ticking off all bills that have already been debated through the House of Representatives and the Senate. So, in order for a bill to become legislation and to become a law, it needs to get royal assent. And this royal assent is provided by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister. The second role of the Governor General could be to withhold royal assent. If the Governor General felt that the bill didn't satisfy or really show representation of Australia, then they could actually refuse to turn that into legislation. It's never really happened, it doesn't happen very often, but there is that potential to have those powers. The last role of the Governor General is to appoint what is known as the Executive Council. Now, the Executive Council is essentially the leader of the day, the Prime Minister, and his senior ministers, and they're there to provide advice to authorities, subordinate authorities, or government bodies about how to implement that legislation. So once the legislation has been ticked off and signed off, how do you go about administering that legislation to other bodies, and how can they go about enforcing that? So that is the role of the Executive Council, to provide knowledge and information on that. So that is the three main roles of the Crown at lawmaking. And it's basically the same in Victoria as well.